This podcast is sponsored by Communicate and Connect Counseling, where we have a team of therapists who provide individual, couples, and family therapy services, all tailored to meet the needs of military and veteran families. To learn more about our services, visit www.communicateandconnect.com.
You're listening to episode 57 on navigating living overseas in OCONUS military life with Brianna Mendoza. Hey everyone, welcome back. I am excited to have Brianna or Bree here to talk to us about living overseas and living outside of the continental US and what that's like, because for many of us, I know myself, I've never done it. The idea is overwhelming, especially I think for people who have not done it before. So Bree, maybe before we get going into this topic, you could just introduce yourself a little bit to help us know who you are.
Hi, I'm Brianna Mendoza. First off, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. And a little bit about me is first off, I'm a graduate student, studying marriage and family therapy, focusing on military therapy for our military community. Currently, I'm in a process of interning at the South Carolina VA Health System, where we're trying to establish the first MFT cohort. From there, as Liz mentioned, I am a military spouse. Recently, my husband and I just came back from overseas after a few years living in Asia, and now we're back in the US. So I'm super excited to definitely talk about as a spouse living in OCONUS and pretty much what to expect for other spouses who are interested in going to OCONUS. So yeah, definitely. So ready
Yeah.
for this.
Yeah, awesome. I'm excited for this too. So I know I've definitely heard people talk about like CONUS and OCONUS, but I actually had to like look it up and I was like, what on earth when I first heard it? So we're talking about living outside of the continental United States. And I know that can be a really broad range of potential places that somebody could live. And
Right.
so, you said you guys were somewhere in Asia?
Yep,
Okay.
we were in Japan. Actually, my husband was in Korea during the pandemic, and then I met up with him in Japan. And so we lived out the rest of our time in Japan before we moved back to the US
Okay.
as of March this year.
Okay. Wow. So not only did you have to do like the long distance thing and very long distance, but also like you basically moved to Japan on your own too. Like you didn't really it wasn't like you were together moving there.
Yeah, no, and it was also like it was at that time we were just slowly getting out of the pandemic, and so there was a lot of logistics, a lot of restrictions when I left to when I got to Japan. Like, for example, when I was there at that time, I was one of the last few groups where you land in Japan and you had to take a bus to whatever base you're going to. You could not take a train, you could not take the airplane. You had to take the government bus all the way to your base, and then when you got there, then you'll reunite with your spouse. So basically, it was a lot. It was
Yeah.
definitely an experience. And just that experience, like that first experience, I'm like, wow, this is gonna be really interesting. Transitioning from that, not only from COVID, but also like, wow, you're here. You're gonna navigate your life through Japan.
Yes.
And it not only goes for Japan, but it goes for all OCONUS bases. That is including Hawaii and Alaska. So that's so to clarify, OCONUS is anywhere outside of the 48 US states. And I don't know why the military structured it, but Hawaii and Alaska, they're considered overseas, even though they're part of the United States, basically.
Yeah.
So, and every OCONUS base will have their standards and the logistics that everyone has to follow. So, if, for example, if you're going to Asia, you wouldn't fly out of like Seattle because that's like the home port. If you're
Mm,
flying to Europe, you would have to go to like North Carolina, like in Charlotte, or you go up to Baltimore or Dover Air Base for the military flight. So as a spouse in Oconus, like you really have to think about all of the logistics and all of planning where you're gonna live and all that. Once your spouse's orders are dropped and you're going for bound for Oconus, then they give you a certain amount of time for you to plan and really think about, okay, how is this tr your transition from the US to Oconus?
yeah. Wow. I'm just thinking, a regular PCS is hard. And then with a lot of logistics, and then not only are you dealing with more logistics, but you're also doing it in the like post-COVID time and by yourself. Like, wow. Wow
Yeah.
is what I keep thinking.
And
Um,
logistics can even go to like down to the nitty-gritty as simple as like, are you gonna take your car or not? Are you going to take your pets or not? Are you and even like you're looking at your house, like, am I going to take all these things like from my house? And if not, like what am I gonna part with? Obviously, like prior to moving, you're gonna have spouses selling stuff or doing garage
mhm.
sales and whatnot, but even those tiny details really do matter when it comes to logistics and planning when you head to Nakona space. And that's a big tip that, well, that's my first thing, is a big tip that I would give to spouses is once you find out where you're going in Oconus and you have that specific time frame, really start thinking about like talk with your partner. Are you going to take your car? Are you going to take your pets? What are you bringing that is essential or non-essential?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's it's such an interesting question because like our last move was from Virginia to Nevada and
right,
we drove like it wasn't a question, are we taking our cars? You know?
right, right,
So what a
right.
unique extra thing to be thinking about is do we take pets and do we take cars and then how would we get them there? Yes, and I'm also thinking about housing because I know there are a few different bases in Japan, but we had a friend who just went to Japan, and one of the things they were talking about is there really wasn't for them where they were going, there wasn't off-base housing. It's like
Right.
only on-base housing, which I know tons of people do on-base housing, but we have always lived off-base. So like the idea of how would I even navigate on-base housing feels like a
Yes.
totally different world from
Um,
what I'm used to trying to figure out.
oh man, and that is something a lot of people don't really think about is housing too. Like you said, you really take advantage of living off base, taking that privilege, but when you get to Oconus, there are bases where off base is limited and your only available choice is living on base. With my experience, in Japan, my husband had the privilege of living off base.
Mm,
However, when I came, the base commander said we needed to move on base. Like families would have to move on base. But the active duty or single personnel who did not have family members, they can live off base.
oh
Now
wow.
that it's, yeah, now it's changed. Now some bases are allowing families to move off base. However, that is something to think about too. Like when during a short time living in our off-base housing, like we had like a 3,000 square foot home, multiple rooms. It
Hmm.
was a two-story. And then when we moved on base, we we moved to a 1,300 foot townhouse. And so it was a really, I mean, we managed to make it work, but it was really tough. Like we had to sacrifice space. We had to
Yeah.
sacrifice um space for not only us, rooms, we for our pets too. Like, yeah, it was a really tough on us, but we managed to make it work though.
Yeah. I was just thinking that's significant downsizing.
Right.
Um, yeah, when you first said, what are you going to take with you? Like, I think when it's a normal PCS, everybody downsizes some. It's like, oh, I have these clothes that don't fit anymore. They can go to
Yeah.
Goodwill, and um,
Yeah.
but that's like, we don't really need these couches. We don't need our like this whole entire guest bedroom set or
Right,
yeah, it's like
right,
getting rid of significant amount of stuff to
right.
downsize that way.
Yeah, and even too, like, I mean, I've had several spouses that are I connected with in Japan, and they were telling me like, you I'm so glad we live off base because we have the space. If not, then like our couch can barely fit our living room because of how short or how much footage we lost in our compared to our old home. So
Yeah.
those little things, it it's factors to definitely consider on base and just living overseas in general.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm also thinking about pet limitations. We are in such a rural location here that we had to do the whole overseas screening process
Yep.
even though we're not overseas, just because we're
Right.
in a really rural location, and we had thought about living on base, but there were pet limitations, like you could only have two pets, and we have three
Yes.
pets, and I'm thinking that sort of thing probably is also something to consider if you're going overseas or
Yeah.
um,
So as far as the pet limitation, um, generally the rule of thumb is two pets or below is good. If you want to have a third pet, you would have to get what's called an exception to policy letter, so an ETP. That's basically a approval from your leadership that we're allowed to have pets on base. And the main reason is because for traveling purposes. So if especially for OCONUS, if you're taking your pets with you, my best tip is the minute you have your not the orders that are like online, but the hard physical copies of your orders, make an make a reservation with your airline as soon as possible because pet spots are very limited on military flights. Like
mm,
for us, we almost had to stay an extra month in Japan because the flights come leaving Japan to Seattle were so limited due to pet space. And so it was like a dogfight that we really had to fight for our spot. And we've seen instances where those who are leaving the base already said they have their paperwork and whatnot, they couldn't leave because they miss a certain step or they're missing like a certain paperwork. So you as spouses, like it is a obviously it is a big stress for you and your partner and your family, but even as little as that, like be proactive and make sure like before you're leaving, have everything set, like you have a checklist that that every active duty member has before leaving. So it's bad. Like my husband and I just went through every checklist. Like we were paranoid. Like we even had to take our pets to the airport and do like a crate fitting and make sure that everything is set. So when we leave, we don't have any issues leaving. So it's those little steps, the added extra
Yeah.
steps that start to create the stress and start to feel overwhelmed. Um, and obviously when you as a spouse are overwhelmed, it goes like you get that feeling from your spouse too, like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed too. So
Hmm.
it's it's best to plan in advance, and the closer that to the dates that you're leaving, double check, triple check. It does not hurt to call. You have resources, the facilities there to ensure that every once travel day hits, you can leave smoothly. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's another big tip I do tell spouses whenever we're talking about leaving OCONUS or heading into OCONUS. You're gonna get every OCONUS has they have their list of, for example, for pets, like what do you need? For example, you need to have, it's best to have your pet registered on base, the current base that you're at, so that they're in the records, and also you need to have them microchip
Okay.
so that when you get to your new base, you just register them at the vet clinic. You're already put up in the system, and for us, we like it because it's convenient. We can get all our all our pets' records are on there just for record keeping.
Hmm.
And you don't have to like if you're going to like a civilian or an off-base clinic, like you're gonna have to get those records too and all that. Like
And
just
transfer.
to
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So just that added you have to find ways to relieve those like little extra stresses
Yeah. Make
and
it
make it easier
simple.
to understand. Exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really what I'm taking in as I hear you sharing about this is how much to really stay organized and be proactive and double and
Yeah.
triple check and to somehow try to find ways to make it easier because like I'm just thinking like if I get rid of a bunch of stuff that's easier. Like what thing anything that would make it easy because it's going to
Right.
be so much extra stress to do.
Right. Right. And like I said, that when you're stressed, your partner feels stressed, and you're gonna make everyone feel stressed. And living in Alconas, you just have so many external factors that is not under your control. And oftentimes, we've like we've seen spouses where they would break down or their act that the partner breaks down too, um and being very honest, like it's not easy living in Alconas. Your family's not there, the culture's different, the language is different, the custom is different. And so oftentimes we've seen people who come to an Akonas base and they just stay within the base because it's familiar to them. They don't need to interact with the local people. They don't need to, that additional stress. But on the flip side, we've had so many people who are so excited to go live in Alconas and they loved it. They loved the culture, the food, the people, the language. And oftentimes they would extend their time in Oconas before moving back. Um, and I
Yeah.
think it's something to be said that when you're living in Oconas, it's all about your experience and how you and your partner or your family, how you guys make of it. Because at the end of the day, from day one, when you get to the Oconus base to um day, I don't know, you get and you leave, then you start to have these like I don't want to say regrets, but start to have like these doubts, like, oh man, we should have done this, or oh, we should
Mm,
have taken advantage of this. Um, and man, like I was so happy being here. Now we're back here in the States and whatnot. So those um those things just run through your head, and you really, like I said, it's really based on experience. Because the active duty member will obviously that's their work and they're gonna
yeah.
have their their thing too, but also as a spouse, like do take advantage of the resources that are there for you, as well as don't be afraid to try new experiences. And the beauty of it is you learn to appreciate the culture, the country. You learn to appreciate how much you have in the US. And
Mm,
that's one of the biggest things is not many when you come back to the US you realize like, wow, I can't believe I had this much freedom or this much space, or like I can take advantage without having like restrictions or whatnot. So yeah, don't wholly based on experience.
yeah. And I think what I'm taking is people can have drastically different experiences. And if your experience is really rough, there are resources to help with that. And then what I'm hearing will also help is if you specifically look for the opportunities that you
Yes,
have being overseas and being able to experience something new and different that you wouldn't get to experience if you were just in the
right.
US.
Right. For example, one of our best experiences was my husband and I got to go to like nature hikes, nature trails in Japan. We got to try the traditional onsen, like traditional hot springs. And even when we had our dogs, like we, we had such a really good relationship with we had our local dog cafe that serves as a cafe, a hotel. And so we would just drop our dogs there. They had a really like we bonded with the locals so much that oftentimes we were like, man, we still think about them today. We still talk about them. We we whenever spouse active duty members or spouses, like when they come and talk to us, like, and if they're going to Japan, like we promote them because they really changed our perspective.
Mm,
and like coming here, like like we don't have that luxury anymore, so we have to rebuild coming back to the US.
yeah. So
Yeah,
I'm thinking like we're talking a little bit about like how it can be like the impact that it can
yeah,
have
the
on
impact, yeah,
spouses. Some people it's really rough, some people it's amazing, and but I'm thinking, you mentioned it a few times, like if one person is really stressed, it impacts the relationship and the whole sort of family dynamic. We feed off of
right.
each other. And
Hmm.
I'm thinking that would be the case, not just with the stress of like the move, but like
Right,
if I am hating where I'm living, that's
yeah,
going to have an impact on my relationship versus if we're somehow finding these opportunities to explore together, that might have a very different impact on my relationship. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
yeah. No, definitely. When you made a great point when you talk about stresses and people feeding off of each other. So it's one thing that as a spouse, if you, like you said, if you hate where you're living at, you can express that to your partner. However, you also have to think on the other side too, like your partner has very limited choices on changing jobs.
Mhm.
So, and you want your spouse, like, you want to make sure that your spouse is like in a good place to where like he is able to complete his job and come home at the end of the day. And having that stress can really impact the work ethic. It can impact how communication, the dynamics. And so you have to take that time to understand where you're coming from. This is where communication comes in so important. It's critical to have communication and express how you're feeling, express what your partner's feeling, and find a way to find that little positive in that negative experience, because it will you when you leave OCONUS, you will have a better understanding. You have your relationship with your partners a lot stronger. I wouldn't say you want to feel invincible, but navigating like OCONUS and the military life might be a little bit easier,
Mm,
um, rather than not having that experience and not experiencing those negative situations
yeah,
at that time. Yeah.
if I'm following you, let me just make sure I'm following you. It's sort of like if we are going through this together, we can see it as an opportunity to to practice being a team, sort of, and to work on our communication and to handle this as a team together. And then
Mhm.
as we handle it, it will also make us feel like an even stronger relationship because we just navigated something so different together.
Right, right. And your like the experience that you both create together will have for me, if you would have like a stronger relationship moving forward, and it builds positivity, and not only with your partner but with other people, the way you communicate and the way you interact and build relationships that way as well. So it not only goes beyond just with a partner, but also like your different networks, to your kids, to your family, other family members, to people, coworkers, whatnot.
Hmm. Yeah, as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about how important it would be to be really clear about what I'm looking for. Like if I'm having a hard time, I do sort of have to have some acceptance that my partner can't just get a different job. So then it might be really important for me to be clear, like, I just need you to understand this, or I just need
Yes.
emotional support, or I just need you to hug me
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
rough today, or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I mean, from my experience, there were so many times where I would have to take a little bit more weight off my husband because he was having a bad day. Or there are times where like I wasn't at my best and my husband had to pick up the rest of the pieces. So it's it's not it's not all flowers and butterflies in this perfect world and all coldness. No, there's gonna be days where it's stormy, it's rainy, and it's okay. It's okay to have those feelings, because other spouses will have those feelings as well. And it just depends on the couple and the individual and how you go about it. If you want to continue to have to on this negative maladaptive behavior trend, that's on you. Or if you want to create that change and find something positive that makes you happy or your partner happy, that's on you too. So like I said, it's really on experience and how both of you can handle the external forces living in Okonis.
I think what you're saying is, yes, there are times that are going to suck. And if we just are only focusing on the negative, it's all just gonna be negative. Versus
Yeah,
if we can kind of acknowledge, yes, this is hard and support each other, but then try to be proactive around how can we make this the most positive it can be, that will help.
definitely.
Yeah,
Fully agree with you on that.
yeah, okay. Great. Well, I'm wondering if you have kind of any other tips for either spouses or couples who are just navigating living OCONUS and military life overseas.
Oh, wow. I
Yeah,
could give
kind
a
of,
million.
yeah,
I could give
great.
a million spouses, like, I could give a million tips on not only for spouses and but for the couples.
Well, we can
My
start with spouses if you want, and then we
okay.
can transition to couples.
Okay. So, my biggest tip, let's say in a perfect world, you find out that your spouse is moving to Oconus. Enjoy it, celebrate it. Like, that's my first tip. Like, embrace the new change. Because oftentimes, like, the active duty member finds out that they're going to Oconus, they're so excited. And then the spouse is like, oh, I don't know how I feel about it. And
Hmm.
it's like you don't want to like ruin the excitement and whatnot. Acknowledge it and embrace it. And if you have any concerns on that table on the table, talk to your spouse about it. And it's important to lay out those concerns before prior to leaving the US. And when you get to and like I said in the planning phases, as the days get closer, like it's for me it was like a roller coaster. It was just so much, so many things happening. And the one thing I would love to the biggest step with spouses is don't feel like, oh my goodness, I'm the only one experiencing this. I'm the only one who has these like negative feelings, because there are some spouses too who may have the same experience, or who may experience something similar to you. And when you get there, it's okay to connect. Please, that I cannot say a word, connect with other spouses. Prior to me and my like I'm leaving. I was leaving home. I I mean, I kind of had a it took me a little bit because I didn't really know what I was getting into as a spouse. And it's weird transitioning from like a military kid, a brat, to a spouse. And it took me a while to find like all these Facebook pages that have like to connect with spouses or to find all these like Facebook pages that are related to the base. So when I got to Japan, like I was so lost. Like, what am I doing here? How am I gonna navigate this? And so like my husband had to guide me, and as you go along your Okona's journey, like you're gonna find stuff to do like on the internet. Research too. It's important to research
Hmm.
where you're going. Like you really have to prepare yourself. Some there's a misconception where it's like, okay, I'll just figure it out when I get to the base. I'll figure it out.
Mm.
Well, when you get to the base, like how can you actually figure it out? Because you're so overwhelmed with everything and you don't know where to start. So those are my biggest tips for spouses is relax, don't rush into the process, and embrace the journey, acknowledge it, communicate, and take advantage. Take advantage. Like
Mm.
I'm always telling other spouses who are going to Oconus, like you are going to another country, and not many people have that advantage, or not many people have that opportunity. And
Yes.
I've and so like for me, like I have to drill it in their head, like take advantage and enjoy, reflect, because it's all a journey. And
Yeah.
and I have to do like a reality check, like it's everything is temporary.
Hmm.
You're not gonna stay in Oconus for 20 something years or your entire career. No. Like every time is so precious and it goes by so quick that by the time that you leave, it's like, oh man, I didn't get to do as much as I wanted to do. Or
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm
So that
hearing
is
like really try to squeeze as much out of it, out of the
Yes.
experience as you can.
Yes. Like I
Yeah.
said, you're when you're in OCONUS, you're not on a time limit, but kind of are on a time limit. Unless you and your spouse love it so much and you extend. But then again, they only give a very limited amount of extensions before like
Mhm.
you have to get out and you have to move to another base
Yeah. And so these were your tips for spouses. Did you
for
have, and I
spouses.
know you had a million, so tell us your tips for couples who are navigating this together.
Yeah, for couples. Okay. As very similar to spouses, but recognize recognize that this is a new chapter in navigating like your life as a couple because like I said, time is limited. And once you close that chapter, you move on, as well as communication. I cannot stress the importance of communication because at the end of the day, if you don't have any family members to rely on, you don't have any friends to rely on, it's you and your partner or
Hmm.
or your family. So it's important to express what you're feeling, regardless if it's good, bad, ugly. Like, you need to have this sense of you are in a good place, regardless of all these external factors, regardless of you being a conus. Another tip is support each other. So, from the active duty, member, if your spouse wants to do an activity with other spouses, let them do it. Or if they want to go on a trip, let them do it. And it's reversed for the spouse too. Like if the active duty member needs to do another assignment that's outside of OCONUS and like they don't have a choice to do it, but all you have to do is support. And as well as take the time to know your surroundings, know the people that you're going to be with, even if it's coworkers, even if it's the spouses, even if it's like the local people. Take advantage. And I've always want to stress that for a military couple, you are one. You're not higher, like no one is higher over the other. No one is better over the other. You are in unison and you are experiencing things together. So you work as a team, you work to navigate living on a CONUS, and you build that experience so that when you come back to the US, you have a greater sense of appreciation. You have a greater sense of, hey, I can do this. You have
Confidence.
confidence, opportunities, and yeah, my last thing is have fun. Have fun while you're out there in OCONUS. Like if you want to go try the local foods, go for it. If you want to go to like nature hikes, go for it. Like time is precious.
Yeah.
And you just like we've stressed before, you have to squeeze as much time that's given and because like that you would leave like very soon. In the Air Force, there's a time limit, like maybe at most 2 or 3 years.
Mm,
And some people think it's a lot of time, but
it can go by
others,
fast.
it can go by so fast. Like, I mean, if you're there for like 2 years, you don't really have that much time to really learn about the culture or learn about the language because you're there and then you gotta go.
Yeah.
Unless, like I said, unless you extend. So yeah, those are some
Yeah.
tips like for the couples.
I think that's what I'm going to be taking away is that, yes, there can be some struggles and make the most out of it, have fun, be proactive about trying to get the most out of the experience.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Well, Brianna, thank you, and Bree. Sorry, I know you go by
It's
Bree.
okay.
Bree.
It's okay.
Yeah, but I was thinking, how can people find you? And I was thinking they're going to have to find you as Brianna. So,
It's a,
yeah,
it's okay.
can you share like if somebody wanted to connect with you, how could they do that?
Okay, so we'll start with the social media, the social media handles. So on Facebook, you can find me as Brianna Mendoza on Facebook. And then on LinkedIn, it's the same thing, Brianna Mendoza. You can just search up my name. And then for email, if you feel free to email me about anything about spouse life, anything with CONUS and whatnot, you can email me at Fajardo, Fajardo _ Brianna, Brianna @yahoo.com.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for offering that to the listeners because I'm thinking, yeah, I'm imagining it is stressful, especially the first time. So you might have people reaching out, asking you questions.
That's fine.
Yeah,
I love to help out spouses. I love to help out people navigating the military life because it is scary. It
yeah,
is like it's overwhelming. It's a new thing, but I'm always telling people that there's nothing to be scared of. Everyone who enters the military life starts somewhere. It will get rocky. It is rocky at first, but once you find your groove and your routine, it will smooth out and will be better. It will be better,
yeah,
I promise.
yeah. Well, Bree, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, please take a second to go rate, review, and subscribe so you get all of our future episodes. Make sure to check out the show notes to sign up for our free 10-week relationship email course. This email course is really designed for people who are maybe having trouble with communication or connection in their relationship and helping them develop some quick wins right away to start improving it. While I am a therapist, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not considered therapy. And it should also not be a replacement for therapy. If you think you need a professional of any kind, you should definitely go find one. Until next time.